Lie down, child. Listen to the rain as it drums its cold, rhythmic fingers against the glass, and let me tell you a forgotten story. It's a tale from back in the Maine woods, where the pines grow too thick and the dark stays a little too long after the sun goes down. It's about a man named Paul Miller, or at least, the man who called himself Paul. You see, the world is full of empty spaces, child, and sometimes, things slip out of those empty spaces and borrow a life because they are tired of being nothing. They take a face, they take a name, and they wrap themselves in human skin to keep out the cold. But sooner or later, the real owner comes to collect the rent. And that brings us to a tiny cabin off Route 9, where the digital clock on the nightstand was just turning a bleeding, radioactive green 12:03 a.m. The digital glow of the nightstand clock was a bleeding, radioactive green 12:03 a.m. In the small, wood-paneled bedroom of his cabin off Route 9, Paul Miller lay awake. He was 52, or at least the body he inhabited was. He had the memories of a boy who had broken his nose on a swing set in '63. He had the memories of marrying a girl named Sarah in a damp Methodist church, while a July thunderstorm rattled the stained glass. He had the memory of her death 3 years ago, the long, agonizing months in the oncology ward, the smell of rubbing alcohol, the way her hand felt like a bundle of dry twigs in his own. But if he reached back past those memories, into the deep, greasy dark of his mind, he remembered the other thing. He remembered the cold, the endless, shifting, gray nothingness. He remembered being a shadow with no shape, a hunger with no mouth. He remembered the night 33 years ago when he had stood on the porch of this very cabin, a blank-faced thing in the shivering Maine dark, and knocked 3 times. He remembered the young man who had looked through the glass, the sudden, terrible theft of a soul, and the way he had slid into Paul Miller's skin like a man slipping into a warm bath. He had stolen a life. He was one of them. And now, the quiet of the cabin had stretched tight, like a drumhead waiting for the stick to fall. Knock. The sound echoed through the hallway. It was sharp, definitive. Paul's heart-a-heart that didn't originally belong to him, but had beat in his chest for over 3 decades, did a sudden, sickening flip-flop. Knock. The second one was heavier, carried the familiar, hollow resonance of the void, the call of his own kind. A cold sweat broke out along the nape of his neck. For 30 years, he had played the part of Paul Miller so well that he had forgotten what he was. He had loved Sarah. He had wept at her funeral, not because it was in the script of a human husband, but because his stolen heart was genuinely breaking. He had become real, or at least he had desperately wanted to be. 3, the lease was up. The landlord of the dark had come to collect. Paul swung his legs out of bed. His bare feet hit the cold floorboards. He didn't feel fear so much as a profound, heavy exhaustion. He walked down the narrow hallway, his shadow stretching out long and monstrous under the yellow nightlight. He stopped 3 feet from the solid oak door. "Who's there?" he called out. His voice sounded thin, but it was the only voice he had. No answer. Only the wind whistling through the gaps in the screen door. Paul stepped forward, rising on his toes, and pressed his right eye to the diamond-shaped pane of warped glass. At first, there was only the dark. Then, the clouds parted, letting a sliver of pale moonlight fall across the porch. A figure was standing there. It was a blank slate. A featureless gray mannequin wearing his own blue flannel shirt, the one with the frayed left cuff. It had no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a smooth, egg-like expanse of gray flesh. But as Paul watched, the smooth skin of the entity began to ripple. Like hot wax, it started to mold itself. A nose began to push outward. Sockets sank into the skull. A mouth tore itself open. It was taking Paul's face. The face he had stolen 30 years ago. And as the entity took the face, Paul felt a sudden, terrifying emptiness wash over him. He looked down at his hands. The skin of his fingers was beginning to lose its color, turning a dull, featureless gray. The memory of Sarah's laugh began to flicker, fading like an old photograph left in the sun. The thing on the porch was unmaking him. It was reclaiming the stolen goods. "It's time to go back to the dark," a silent voice whispered in Paul's mind. It was a cold, soothing voice. "You've played the man long enough. Let go of the grief. Let go of the pain. It would be so easy to slide back into the quiet, painless nothingness. No more waking up to an empty house. No more aching joints. No more missing Sarah until his chest felt like it was full of broken glass." The duplicate raised its hand, its fingers half formed, half gray, and pressed its palm against the glass. Paul looked at the face on the other side. It was almost complete now. It looked exactly like him, but there was no warmth in it. It was just a mask. Paul looked at his own fading hands. He thought of Sarah. He thought of the way she used to burn the toast and laugh about it. He thought of the sheer, agonizing beauty of being alive, of having a name, of feeling pain. The grief was terrible, yes, but it was his. He had earned it. He had paid for this stolen life with 30 years of genuine love. "No," Paul whispered. He pressed his hand against his chest, right over his beating, stolen heart. "I'm not going back." He stepped closer to the door, placing his own hand flat against the inside of the glass, directly opposite the entity's palm. He locked his fading gray eyes onto the half-formed eyes of the creature. "I took this life," Paul said, his voice ringing out loud and clear in the quiet cabin. "And I became it. I loved her. I buried her. I am Paul Miller. The debt is paid." He poured every ounce of his grief, his love, and his 30 years of human memories into that touch. He didn't fight with violence. He fought with the sheer weight of his humanity. A sudden, blinding warmth bloomed from the point where their palms met. The entity on the porch recoiled. The warped, half-formed face of Paul Miller on its head shattered, dissolving back into smooth, featureless gray. The creature shivered, as if burned by the sheer, concentrated heat of a human soul. It took a step back, then another, looking down at its own blank hands in what seemed like utter bewilderment. Slowly, the color returned to Paul's fingers. The gray faded, replaced by the warm, pink flush of living blood. The memory of Sarah's smile rushed back into his mind, bright and sharp and beautiful. On the porch, the blank entity stared at him through the glass for a long moment. It didn't knock again. It simply turned, its gray form melting into the shadows of the tall pines, returning to the dark from which they both had come. Paul stood at the door for a long time, his hand still resting on the glass. He was a monster who had stolen a man's life. But as he turned and walked into the kitchen to put the kettle on, feeling the cold floorboards beneath his very real feet, he knew one thing for certain. He was home.